Today's interview is with Kevin Van Tighem on his new book, Wild Roses Are Worth It. Kevin's background is considerable if you're not already aware. A former park superintendent of Banff National Park, he has worked as a biologist with the Canadian Wildlife Service, a lifelong Albertan. I was interested to note with family roots in the province going all the way back to 1875. Author previously of 14 books on wildlife and conservation, and he has been a regular columnist for Alberta Views magazine, which brings us, in fact, to Kevin's latest book, Wild Roses Are Worth It. Whose idea was it to take a curated collection of past Alberta Views columns that you had written going back as far as 2014 and then turn it into a book?
Well, actually, it was my idea. I'm working on a bigger project, and it's stymieing me. And I was sort of feeling like I needed to get somewhere with something. And I thought, when you write a magazine article, it stands on its own. But when you bundle it up with others and organize them a bit, sometimes you get something where the sum is greater than the total is greater than the sum of the parts. And so that was what I thought I should try doing, because it occurred to me that I'd been approaching certain themes from different directions over the years, and maybe I could aggregate them a bit. And so that's really where it came from. It was my idea. I pitched it to Rocky Mountain Books, a wonderful publisher that supports sometimes some pretty crazy ideas by their authors, and they decided to take a chance on it, and here we are.
And it really does work as a cohesive whole. So obviously your intentions were well reflected in the final product. To get at the material in the book, I felt a good starting place, in fact, is simply the title, Wild Roses Are Worth It. Can you talk a little bit about the choosing of that title?
Well, I've always loved the old license plates that said Wild Rose Country, and I grew up in, there was a real sense that wild roses were who we were. It was our provincial flower emblem. It was chosen actually in 1930. They had a bunch of elementary school kids across the province vote for their favorite flower, and they picked the wild rose. And so, but it sort of went out of sight there, because one of these little upstart parties that arrives in this province with great frequency called itself the Wild Rose Party. And the ruling party government of the day, the Progressive Conservatives, didn't like that, because that was their competition and they were advertising it in all their license plates. So you don't hear much about it anymore, but it's still Wild Rose Country. And wild rose is a wonderful metaphor. A beautiful flower, sweet scent. It's ubiquitous. At the same time, it's full of thorns. It grows in dense tangles and can be a bit weedy. So it seems to have been well chosen as a symbol of our collective provincial personality.
At least part of this, of what this collection achieves, is undoubtedly an expression of a great love of place, of one's sense of home. And I would guess that's exactly what you're hoping to evoke inside the readers of your book.
I think that's very much where I'm coming from. Is I've always felt that who we are is where we are, and to the degree that we're conscious of that, the better the chances are that we'll be able to sustain where we are. There's so many different people who have come to Alberta from so many different places. I talk about going back to 1875 and sort of trying deep roots, right? But I don't really think it's about deep roots. I think it's about how firmly your roots grip. And there's an awful lot of people that are Albertans now who have come from different places, and the one thing they all share in common is that they are here today in this place, and their identity is now founded on this place. And so I just think we need to be more conscious of that. This is probably one of the finest parts of the entire world. And to a large degree, a lot of us have just used it as a place to get money from. And sometimes at the expense of the enduring values and the enduring features that make this place what it is. So we're not going to get the future right if we can't see ourselves reflected back from the decisions we make on the landscape. So yeah, love of place, absolutely. I would never move. I would never, like they say in the river runs through. I'm never leaving Alberta, brother.
But also, I mean, I can tell from the way you write that, and the kinds of things that you are focusing on, that it's not just your love of place. You really want Albertans to get it, and to be emotively moved to do something.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that there's profiles of individuals in here and lots of references to other people is that a lot of Albertans do get it. I mean, this is we've got a legacy of really good connected people that are really committed to their communities, to their environment, but they don't get a lot of airplay, and I guess that's one of the things that's frustrated me in recent years, is that we have a reputation, certainly internationally and probably provincially, I mean nationally, and to some degree amongst ourselves, as a place of sort of entitled, grabby, resource exploiters. That sort of that redneck thing, the pickup truck, and the ball cap. And I mean, that's part of who we are. I mean, that's everybody's brother or cousin, right? But there's so much more than that. There's so many more people who make this place what it is, and they're not about just grabbing money out of the ground. They are about sustaining everything that's above and below the ground. And they need airplay. They need to be heard. Their stories need to be heard, and their stories need to become part of our stories rather than just one of greed and entitlement.
The articles that were collected for this book were then gathered into thematic chapters. I'll just run down them briefly: nature, land matters, the cost of oil, agriculture, parks, wild meat, and being better. The chapter nature has a couple of articles in the early going that jumped out at me: making magic and a matter of timing. Because it seems to me the professional biologist and the nature lover definitely merge in these two pieces. There is awe in you, frankly, over the seeming magic of nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. We have a sense of in science, and I'm trained as a scientist. I'm studied plant ecology and worked my whole life in landscape ecology, and so in our Western science, we tend to sort of take things apart, put labels on them, and then set them aside from ourselves and look at them objectively and say, well, now we've classified them, we've described them, they're taken care of. It's a reductionist approach. We reduce everything to labels and jargon. But ecology is about looking at the connections, and ecology is about recognizing the chains of cause and effect. And as soon as you start to dig into that, yeah, the magic explodes around you. This is such an amazing world. This is such an amazing place. All the ways in which all of the things that we are surrounded with that we see as scenery or we see as resources, all the ways in which they connect and interact, those things are fascinating. And the degree that we are able to be conscious of the magic and to constantly get turned on again by that magic really enriches our life and probably humbles us and makes us a little bit more sensitive to the fact that decisions have consequences and causes have effects. Things come together. So yeah, I think maybe I'm trying to impart counsel, caution, and stewardship and respect, but that comes out of fundamentally a sense of awe and admiration, and I wanted that to come across too. We are so privileged to live where we live and to be surrounded with such beauty and diversity and complexity. Yes, so we should be paying attention, shouldn't we?
Well, in the article, A Matter of Timing, you really center on the amazing timing that nature has in its cycles and its rhythm. I mean, particularly in this case, the fact that every spring, food sources emerge from the land at exactly the right time for the arrival of migrating birds. And that if it was off a month either way, it could actually be very critical for those species that are coming in. And
Mhm.
yet somehow for centuries that has worked itself out and has become this rhythm. But you also caution that with things like global warming and the changes we are, or climate change, and the changes that we are inducing, at least we have a partial responsibility in that area, that it can have really unintended consequences.
Yeah, there really, when you think about the timing of natural events, there's really two big triggers. One of them is day length, and day length never changes. Every year is the same. And the other one is temperature. As cold becomes warm, as warm becomes hot, different biological processes get started. So everything in nature is timed according to those sorts of cycles. But when you take the day length and it stays fixed, and the warming cycles and cooling cycles move down the calendar, some things can get out of synchrony. And that was the point I was making there. Right now the ground squirrels are emerging, right? There's gophers popping out of the snowdrifts all over the province. Well, what a perfect coincidence that happens to be when the bald eagles are migrating, and they're using all this energy to come north. And here's all these fat little nuggets sitting on top of this. That's the magic. That's the magic. How could you not be awestricken by the ways in which these animals and these places and these natural processes have tied themselves together to create this incredible humming surrounding of nature,
When we another area in the book, and you insert these facts every once in a while that are really quite striking, because they are almost they're statistical indicators of what we have done living here. And when you actually see them in black and white, it can be quite striking. I mean, you note that 30% of Alberta total has already been lost and put under the human footprint. 78% of parkland has been appropriated for human use. 60% of prairie grassland has been lost, mostly to farming. If you're writing a report card on Alberta's eco-health today, what grade would you give it?
I'd say we're probably in the C range now, and our grades are failing. We're slipping, and it's partly because we aren't paying attention. We haven't noticed how much prairie we've lost. What we've noticed is that a lot of prairie wildlife is endangered. Well, it's endangered because it doesn't have a place to live, and it's endangered partly because we're spreading herbicides, pesticides, and things. But it's habitat loss. It's been crept up over the years. It's interesting now that it is finally coming to a head with this coal issue, where there's an awful lot of debate over the current government's interest in opening up the eastern slopes, Rocky Mountains, and the foothills for coal strip mining. And suddenly there's this huge public uproar. Maybe we didn't notice the loss in the prairie. Maybe we didn't notice the loss of the parkland, because those are still sort of environments where we feel comfortable. We just don't notice the wildlife anymore. But the eastern slopes, that's where you go for our summer holidays. That's what sits along the western horizon. What the heck, going to strip mine it? So it's funny that my book came out at the same time, because I think people were finally waking up to some of those statistics and the implications they have for who they are and what they assume about what will last in this place. Maybe our marks will start to improve now. There's more people paying attention. And if so, hey, hats off to Jason Kenney. By threatening our eastern slopes, he finally woke up Albertans to the fact that nature matters and that it's part of who we are.
Well, it was way back in 2018 that you wrote an article in Alberta Views called "Strip Mines in the Headwaters," which is in this book. It's a more comprehensive article, looking at all of the things that were intended in terms of coal exploration. And this is back now 3 years, well before the hue and cry arose anyway. You take a look at where we are now. You more or less answered my question in some ways, but did it actually surprise you to see Albertans galvanized as much as they were on the coal issue?
I was surprised at two things. I was surprised at the removal of the coal policy. Like I never realized that there was going to be so much threat emerging so fast after I wrote that article. That article was triggered really by one mine proposal, the Grassy Mountain mine, and my awareness in researching that there was an awful lot of coal leases out there. But when the coal policy was rescinded, suddenly it opened up the entire eastern slopes to strip mining. So that sort of blew my mind. I didn't realize I was going to be ahead of the curve on that one. And then to see thousands and thousands of Albertans rise up in their hind legs, and Albertans from the city, from the country, from First Nations, every political walk of life. I've never seen anything like that in the history of this province, where everybody came together, and they came together over an environmental issue that mattered fundamentally to them, their water security and their eastern slopes. I'm amazed by that, and I'm really inspired by it, because we're together on this. Albertans are together on this, and we're together trying to defend things that matter. Maybe I didn't even need to write the darn book. Because in some ways, that's what I think I was trying to hopefully trying to contribute to by writing the book, was to create was to build a different narrative around what it means to be Albertan and what it means to be of Alberta. I guess maybe what I should say is maybe its timing is good,
Well, yes, it certainly is part of everything coming to a head at this point, and the book is definitely right on in terms of not only the coal issue, but the way the book is organized. You also bring focus to bear on what the impacts are of our engagement in agriculture and forestry, and above all, oil and gas. Every single one of these key economic areas in our province, important as they are to our economy and the jobs that so many of us hold, they're also having a serious and deleterious impact on the ecology of Alberta in different ways. And sometimes it seems almost overwhelming to see all the different fronts in which we have important environmental issues we need to address. Do you remain an optimist that we can get a handle on this and somehow find a better way forward?
A year ago, I might have said no. I think now, increasingly, the challenges we face as a society, not just as a province, but as a society globally, are huge, are absolutely threatening to us. But and it's one reason that I cast in this book, and especially in the introduction back so far, is that if you think about what it was like to be in Alberta in 1943, say, you come out of the big bank crashes in the beginning of the 1930s. You come through the dirty 30s. Then all the young men go off to war. The war looks like it's never going to end. Their entire economy is sunk because there's nobody working in it except to feed the war machine, and all the money is going to the war. Try and picture hope at a time like 1943 Alberta. There was no hope. You could not sit in that moment and look in the future and see any hope. And yet the 1950s and the 60s, those boom times that my generation was born out of, and all of the great things that we experienced in our lifetimes all came after that. And so it's like that now. It's not different sets of challenges, but most of the raw material that we need to build the perfect future for this province still exist. We've whittled away at them, we've damaged them, we've got a lot of harm to repair, but most of it's still there. And all it needs is for us to start to realize that we are not just a bunch of oil-sucking money grubbers, which is how the rest of the world might want to see us, but that we are in fact people of this place and people who will be in this place for the future, and as a result have a need to weave our culture into the nature of where we are in a way that can sustain both and give our children hope and a future. And I think we could do it, but it's not going to be easy. It means that we need to tell different stories. We need to have different conversations. And again, that's why but like I say, Wild Roses are worth it. And that's why that book is out there.
An absolutely perfect way to end this conversation today, because it really does sum up what your book is about. And it has come along at a time when the public attention and the public mood seems to be more open than ever to hear that message. So we trust it finds a big and robust audience and that it leads to more conversations.
Well, thank you very much. And I certainly enjoyed this one.